The jungle was still, save for the thrum of insects and the low hiss of humidity. Then crack! A single rifle shot echoed through the dripping trees, followed by the thud of a Marine collapsing into the mud. His squad froze. No one saw where it came from. No muzzle flash. No movement. Somewhere out there, hidden in a tangle of roots and vines, a Japanese sniper had struck again. On Guadalcanal in the steaming August of 1942, the Marines faced not just an enemy, they faced ghosts. U.S. Marine Corps' after-action report, Outgunned 1942. The first weeks were chaos. The Marines had landed with M1 1003 Springfield rifles, some fitted with scopes, beautifully machined, precise, but fragile. In the jungle, moisture fogged the lenses. Mud sealed the knobs. The glass gleamed under sunlight, catching an enemy's eye. Many Marines tore them off, wrapping tape over the empty mounts, preferring the plain iron sights. The men began to whisper that the jungle itself was killing their optics. Quartermaster log, Guadalcanal Supply Depot, 1942. The Japanese snipers were trained hunters, often marksmen from rural prefectures. Their Arisakas Type 97 rifles, fitted with compact 2.5x scopes. They fired from nests built high in palms or deep within matted foliage. They didn't need to see their victims clearly. Just movement, just sound. Their discipline was terrifying. Marines who fired back often found nothing but silence. Captured Imperial Japanese Field Manual 1941. By late August, word spread through the battalions. Scopes were liabilities. Veterans from the first firefights began stripping their rifles bare, trading precision for speed. They relied on instinct, muscle memory, and the shimmer of movement between leaves. To hit what couldn't be seen, they had to become hunters themselves. Gunnery Sergeant Charles Red Washburn, a veteran of Shanghai, told his squad, "Don't look through the glass. Fail the shot." 1st Marine Division Oral History, 1947. The shift was quiet, almost unnoticed. But by the time the 1st Marines dug in along the Matanikau River, the pattern was clear. The scopes stayed in the ammo crates, and the men trusted their iron sights. On paper, it made no sense. Why would Marines reject accuracy? But in practice, it saved lives. The scoped rifles required perfect posture, a glint of light, a few extra seconds of stillness, all fatal in a jungle ambush. The Marines learned the Japanese way of camouflage, movement, silence, and they began to win duels. U.S. Navy Combat Film Unit notes, Oct 1942. Each morning, the mist hung heavy over the trees. The Marines' rifles, blackened with soot and oil, looked dull. No reflection, no shine. Across the river, Japanese snipers lay in wait, convinced their magnified glass gave them advantage. Yet, as one Japanese diary later recorded, the Americans' bullets came first, from shadows we could not see. Captured Soldier Diary, Kokoda Region, 1943. The irony wasn't lost on Marine officers. The same Springfield rifle that had once been hailed for precision marksmanship was now being used as a fast, close-range weapon. The average engagement distance on Guadalcanal was under 100 yards, sometimes 30. The battlefields weren't open plains. They were dense green labyrinths where reaction time meant survival. The Marines discovered that firing without scopes wasn't backward. It was adaptation. U.S. Marine Corps Tactical Evaluation, 1943. Back in the States, ordnance officers were puzzled. Reports from the front contradicted doctrine. Training manuals emphasized slow, deliberate fire. But dispatches from the Solomons told another story. Marines firing on instinct, using cover, counting heartbeats before each shot. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, whose raiders fought across the ridgelines, summed it up. "We train to shoot at targets. Here the targets shoot back and disappear." Edson's field report, Sept. 1942. Even the enemy noticed. Captured Japanese correspondents described the Marines as ghosts with fire sticks, appearing suddenly, firing 1 or 2 precise shots, then vanishing. It was the inverse of the sniper's creed, and it was working. Japanese Signal Corps memo, Oct. 1942. By mid-September, the Marines' confidence grew. Platoons learned to coordinate fire by sound, rather than line of sight. One Marine would bait the sniper's shot, drawing his position. Another would angle off to the flank, creeping through ferns. When the enemy fired again, the response was immediate. 3 rounds center mass through the underbrush. They didn't need scopes to find the glint of a lens or the shimmer of breath in the air. They trusted rhythm and intuition like boxers reading feints. Guadalcanal Patrol Report, 1st Battalion, 1942. Corporal Jack Holtz remembered the change vividly. "At first we were scared to even peek out," he later said. "But once we stopped depending on that glass, it felt like the jungle opened up. You see more with your ears, your skin, your nerves." Holtz interview, Marine Historical Division, 1954. What emerged wasn't luck, it was evolution under fire. Every firefight taught something new. Marines began customizing their rifles, sanding the wood, dulling the metal, balancing the weight. Sniper duels became personal challenges. When one Japanese marksman killed 2 men in a day, an entire squad volunteered to track him. They found his nest after dark, empty except for a spent shell and a scope shattered by a single .30-06 round through the lens. U.S. Army Intelligence Summary, 1943. The Marine Rifleman, stripped of magnification, was rediscovering the fundamentals: breathing, trigger squeeze, timing. Those without scopes could fire faster, recover faster, and move through the terrain like hunters. And as combat dragged on into late 1942, the kill ratios began to shift. War Department Statistical Review, 1944. By the Battle of Edson's Ridge, the Marines had internalized their new art. Rain poured down in sheets as Japanese infantry surged through the dark, guided by shouted orders and bayonet glints. Marine riflemen lay prone behind fallen logs, eyes scanning for flashes. Every muzzle flare was answered by iron sights aligned on instinct. Dozens of attackers fell before reaching the wire. After the battle, inspection teams found several Japanese snipers among the dead, each with a rifle still fitted with a pristine scope. After-action report, Battle of Edson's Ridge, 1942. Those scopes, untouched, reflected the moonlight, a cruel irony. The Marines, armed with stripped rifles, had fought through chaos and won. The lesson was clear. Clarity wasn't always an advantage. Sometimes seeing less meant surviving longer. Combat Analysis Section, U.S. Pacific Command, 1943. By year's end, the phrase "without scopes" had become a quiet badge of honor among infantrymen. They saw themselves not as deprived, but as hardened. Their weapon had become an extension of their body, their instinct sharpened by every encounter in the mist. The Japanese snipers, once feared, were being hunted in return. As 1943 dawned and the island campaign spread to New Georgia and Bougainville, one question lingered among new recruits arriving from the States. Why were the veterans removing the very scopes they'd been told were essential? The answer waited in the jungle, where every reflection meant death and every shadow hid an unseen duel. The Marines had discovered something the textbooks never taught, that precision wasn't always mechanical. It was human. And their transformation was only beginning. The secret advantage wasn't in a piece of glass or a factory innovation. It was in the riflemen themselves. When the Marines began fighting without scopes, their effectiveness didn't fall. It climbed. Reports from Guadalcanal to Cape Gloucester noted the same phenomenon: faster reaction times, tighter shot groups, more confirmed kills in jungle terrain. What looked like regression was actually evolution. The M1903 Springfield, born from American steel and decades of craftsmanship, had become something new, a jungle predator's weapon. Technical Manual TM 9270, 1943. The Springfield's iron sights were masterpieces of simplicity. The blade front and ladder-style rear allowed for rapid target acquisition at under 200 yards, the average distance of nearly all Pacific firefights. When paired with .30-06 M2 ball ammunition, traveling at over 2,700 feet per second, the round hit with devastating kinetic force even through thick vegetation. Japanese snipers, using the Type 97 rifle chambered in 6.5 Fadig's 50mm Arisaka, couldn't match the stopping power. The lighter cartridge produced less recoil, ideal for steady-scoped fire, but it lacked the energy to penetrate marine cover or helmets at medium range. Bureau of Ordnance Ballistic Report, 1943. Still, there was more at play than ballistics. Marines had learned to modify their rifles for endurance. Field armorers stripped down scope mounts, reblued barrels, and added rubber seals around bolts to keep mud out. The M1903's Mauser-style action was nearly indestructible, cycling smoothly even after hours of rain. Its simplicity turned out to be the edge. Japanese scopes, though compact, were fragile. Temperature shifts caused fogging, and the rubber seals degraded in humidity. "Every glass fogs," one Marine sergeant remarked, "but iron never lies." Marine Ordnance Workshop Log, Lunga Point, 1942. As the campaign expanded to New Georgia in mid-1943, the U.S. military began noticing a measurable trend. Platoons that ditched scopes had 20–30% higher engagement success during ambush encounters. Officers didn't fully understand it. How could a less advanced method outperform technology? But combat isn't laboratory science. The terrain dictated everything. Where visibility dropped below 50 yards, magnification became a curse. Pacific Warfare Study Group, 1944. Meanwhile, Japanese doctrine remained rooted in precision and patience. Snipers were trained to hold their fire for hours, waiting for a clean shot. But the Americans were no longer presenting predictable targets. The Marines had learned movement discipline, using hand signals, whispering fire commands, alternating positions after every 2 shots. They had unknowingly inverted the psychology of the battlefield. Captured Imperial Japanese Training Notes, 1942. Nowhere was this clearer than during the Battle of Cape Gloucester, December 1943. Torrential rain turned the island into a swamp. Marines slogged through knee-deep mud, visibility barely 10 meters. The 1st Marine Division's advance was halted by unseen rifle fire from Japanese snipers embedded in the jungle ridges. The first day cost them 18 men. By the second, they changed tactics. Captain Louis Lewalt, commanding Company G, ordered his riflemen to advance without scopes, spreading out in hunter pairs. Each Marine fired from the hip or quick shoulder, relying on sound, not sight. After Action Report 1st Marines Deck 1943, what followed became a textbook example of adaptive warfare. A sniper's nest revealed itself with a flash near the Mangalo River. Private William Scott dropped to one knee, aimed by instinct, and fired twice through the brush. The Japanese marksman fell backward, scope shattered against a tree trunk. Within minutes, more hidden positions were neutralized. Marines advanced methodically, firing at probable glints, flashes, and echo points. By dusk, the ridge was cleared. The enemy had lost 14 confirmed snipers. Marines lost 2. Combat Intelligence Summary, Jan 1944. In technical terms, the Marines had rediscovered a core principle of human gunnery: parallax-free focus. Without glass, there was no misalignment, no distortion. The brain processed direct input, and training filled the rest. To the ordnance men studying reports in Washington, this seemed anecdotal. But to the soldiers living it, it was gospel. They began referring to themselves as naked-eye marksmen, U.S. Marine Infantry Board Memorandum, 1944. Yet this was not merely a field improvisation. It became systematized through training. Marine rifle schools in Australia began teaching close-range reflex fire, movement concealment, and instinctive marksmanship drills inspired by jungle veterans. Recruits were told to fire through the green, not at defined silhouettes. A new style was born, one that merged American industrial weaponry with primal combat intuition. Marine Corps Training Bulletin No. 72, 1944. Technically, the M1 1903's aperture sight allowed for extraordinary adaptability. Adjustments were made using range markings from 100 to 2,850 yards, but in the Pacific, those dials stayed at the lowest setting. The Marines focused instead on target indexing, watching branches move, catching reflections of sweat or spotting muzzle smoke before a shot. In these duels, a half-second's advantage was everything. Field Manual FM 23-10, 1942. The Japanese snipers, by contrast, often fired from static, elevated positions, trees, pillboxes, or camouflaged pits. Once compromised, they rarely escaped. American field manuals began including sketches of typical sniper hides, with annotations on how to approach silently from the rear. Marines learned to fire suppressing rounds first, then flank. One report from the 7th Marines recorded an entire sniper platoon eliminated in less than an hour, using coordinated blind volley fire directed by sound triangulation. U.S. Marine Operations Report, Cape Gloucester, 1944. Industrial America also played its part. Factories like Springfield Armory and Rock Island Arsenal modified thousands of rifles mid-production, removing scope fittings and optimizing balance for rapid reloading. This stripped-down version was lighter by nearly half a pound. The soldiers called them jungle rifles. Even General Vandergrift approved the trend, noting in dispatches that simplicity and reliability have proven greater assets than magnification. Ordnance Department Circular No. 157 to 1943, but there was something deeper, the psychology of dominance. Japanese snipers had been symbols of fear. Each shot could paralyze a platoon for hours. Yet by early 1944, that fear had inverted. Marine riflemen hunted snipers deliberately, using bait tactics. They'd hang helmets on sticks, wait for a shot, then counterfire instantly from multiple angles. It became a grim science. In one engagement at Hill 6060, a single Marine squad eliminated 6 enemy snipers in 15 minutes using this method. After Action Report, 7th Marines, Jan 1944. The Marines' secret wasn't just their rifles. It was the fusion of instinct, discipline, and muscle memory. No mechanical scope could calculate the heartbeat timing or predict a shadow's twitch. And every new battle reinforced the doctrine: fight with what survives the mud. By the end of the Cape Gloucester campaign, over 80% of frontline riflemen were fighting without optical aids. Commanders, once skeptical, now issued the order explicitly: remove scopes before deployment. U.S. Pacific Command Directive, Feb 1944. Yet in doing so, the Marines had unknowingly created the foundation for a future revolution. Their instinctive close-range shooting would later evolve into snap shooting, and eventually, in modern terms, reflex marksmanship, the very technique taught to generations of soldiers worldwide. What began as improvisation in a jungle had become doctrine. Infantry Journal Analysis, 1946. By the time the fighting on New Britain ended, the data was undeniable. The Marines had turned a perceived disadvantage into a defining edge. The Japanese, still trusting their glass optics, had been outgunned by men who fired without hesitation, without magnification, and without fear. And as word spread across the Pacific to Tarawa and Peleliu, young recruits began a new ritual: unscrewing their scopes before the first patrol, blackening their rifle metal, and whispering a single phrase passed down from veterans: see through the jungle, not through the glass. The question now was how far this philosophy could go. Could a force built on instinct and reflex hold its edge when technology evolved again? The answer would come soon, on the coral sands of Peleliu, under a sun so bright that every reflection could mean death. By the time the Marines landed on Peleliu in September 1944, their doctrine had matured into a hardened instinct. The beach erupted under blinding sun and coral glare, every grain of sand magnifying light into a weapon. Japanese defenders waited in honeycombed ridges with pre-sighted fields of fire. Snipers positioned in concrete bunkers had clear views of the invasion beaches. Yet when the shooting began, the same outcome repeated. Their first volleys were deadly, but their rain didn't last. Within hours, Marine riflemen began counter-sniping not through glass but through instinct, sound, and motion. U.S. Marine Corps Action Report, Peleliu, 1944. Each man had become his own spotter. They learned to read wind by palm fronds, range by footfalls, distance by echo. The M1 Garand had now joined the Springfield in Marine hands, firing the same .30-06 round with semi-automatic precision. It was heavier, but faster. 8 rounds in quick succession, the en-bloc clip snapping into place with its iconic metallic ping. Against hidden Japanese snipers, speed meant survival. The Marines' refusal to depend on fragile optics now aligned perfectly with the Garand's design. The jungle had taught them to trust muscle memory more than magnification. Technical Bulletin TB Order 369, 1944. Peleliu's ridges turned into a laboratory of instinctive warfare. In the first week alone, Marine rifle companies engaged over 120 confirmed sniper positions. Fewer than 30 escaped counterfire. Post-action surveys found that most kills occurred under 100 yards, too close for scopes, too fast for calculations. The Japanese, realizing this, tried to adapt with decoys and dummy rifles, but Marines countered again using overlapping fire lanes and sound triangulation learned in previous campaigns. Pacific Evaluation Board Report, 1945. Beyond the tactics, the shift carried enormous psychological weight. For months, Japanese sniper fire had haunted every advance, every meal, every moment of rest, but now the fear had changed sides. Marines began carrying captured scopes as trophies, symbols of outdated fear. "You see through glass," one Marine was quoted as saying. We See Through the Fight. Captured Letters Translation, 14th Area Army Archive, 1944. The shift rippled through the chain of command. Psychological assessments conducted by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey later noted that Japanese sniper morale declined rapidly once their aura of invisibility was broken. One interrogated prisoner described it as fighting ghosts who shot without looking. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The Marines' confidence, by contrast, became a weapon itself. They advanced through jungles and ridges with an air of inevitability, measured, relentless, and immune to panic. Behind every rifleman stood a vast industrial engine that sustained the transformation. Springfield Armory, Winchester, and Remington continued producing rifles stripped of unnecessary fittings, each one calibrated for close-range precision. Over 3 million M1 Garands rolled off assembly lines by 1945, each tested, inspected, and oiled by civilian workers, many of them women who had never held a rifle but whose hands shaped victory. War Production Board Report, 1945. Engineers also learned from the field. They developed fog-resistant lens coatings and redesigned mount systems, but ironically the Marines who inspired those innovations no longer wanted them. The field reports kept repeating the same message: reliability over refinement, instinct over instruments. In mud, glass dies, one field technician wrote, steel survives. Marine Logistics Depot Memo, 1944. The broader impact of this philosophy stretched beyond the Pacific. The Army took note, incorporating snap shooting and quick kill exercises into later training manuals. British and Australian forces in Burma adopted similar jungle tactics, blending instinctive marksmanship with local terrain adaptation. By 1945, the concept of precision had shifted. It was no longer about range, it was about reaction. Combined Allied Training Doctrine, 1945. In psychological terms, the Marines' naked-eye warfare became a case study in adaptive dominance. It demonstrated that technology, when misapplied, could become a crutch, while discipline and instinct could outperform superior equipment. For the Japanese snipers, once feared masters of concealment, the loss was existential. Diaries recovered after the war spoke of despair and confusion. One entry read, "The Americans no longer need to aim. They sense us before we strike." Captured Journal, Peleliu Cave Complex, 1944. But not all lessons were triumphant. For many Marines, the constant close-range duels exacted a brutal mental toll. Riflemen often faced the enemy at distances where they could see eyes, hear breath, or smell powder. Many suffered what later generations would call combat fatigue. Yet within that suffering grew a hard-won wisdom that adaptability and simplicity save lives more reliably than perfection ever can. Naval Medical Bulletin, 1945. As the war neared its end, Marine marksmanship doctrine formalized what had been born in chaos. Training films produced in Quantico highlighted the Pacific veterans' techniques: low stances, quick shoulder aim, short bursts, immediate repositioning. Instructors spoke with reverence of seeing through the green, the very phrase whispered by frontline troops months earlier. The Marines had turned an improvisation into institutional legacy. Marine Training Film 26-14, 1945. After 1945, that same instinctive philosophy echoed through every American war. In Korea, U.S. riflemen faced ambushes in fog-covered hills and reverted to iron sights in sub-zero conditions. In Vietnam, dense jungles once again nullified optics, and commanders resurrected the old Pacific methods almost word for word. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the reflex fire principles became the foundation for modern close-quarters training, now enhanced by red dot optics, the spiritual successors to those naked eyes. Infantry Combat Studies Institute, 2004. The cultural resonance also endured. For many Marines, the story of outgunning the Japanese snipers became a parable of grit and adaptability. It wasn't about rejecting technology. It was about mastering it, bending it to human instinct rather than dependence. In post-war interviews, veterans described the feeling of liberation after discarding their scopes. "You stop thinking about the tool," one said, "and start becoming the weapon." Oral History Project. National Archives, 1972. Strategically, this transformation represented a microcosm of the Allied war effort: industrial sophistication, balanced by field improvisation. The same spirit that retooled factories overnight also allowed men in mud and rain to reinvent tactics mid-battle. It was proof that war favors not the side with the most innovation, but the side that learns fastest how to survive. Office of Naval Analysis, 1947. In the decades that followed, the Marine Corps never forgot. At every rifle range, recruits still learn to trust their natural sight picture before relying on optics. They still practice instinctive fire, close grouping, and reaction drills under duress. Each shot carries the echo of those Pacific jungles, the rain, the mud, the crack of unseen rifles, and the calm breath before return fire. The philosophy remains unbroken. Precision begins in the mind, not the scope. Marine Corps Rifle Training Manual, 1995. What began as an adaptation to broken glass and fogged lenses had grown into a legend of self-reliance. The Marines had not merely beaten the Japanese snipers, they had dismantled the myth of mechanical superiority. They proved that victory often belongs not to the most advanced, but to the most adaptable. In a post-war lecture at Quantico, a former platoon leader summarized it best. The scope magnifies your enemy. The eye magnifies your will. The lesson endures across time and terrain, whispered in training fields and battlefield memoirs alike. In war as in life, clarity isn't found through glass, it's found through courage,